Welcome to the RN Mentor Podcast. I'm Dr. Ali Tayeb, nurse, educator, advocate, and United States Navy veteran. This show is about real conversations with nurses moving the profession forward. We discuss leadership, practice, policy, research, and more. What matters and why it matters. I'm glad you're here, so let's get started. Hello and welcome to a special episode of the RN Mentor Podcast. I'm super excited today to be joined by several uh, uh, esteemed colleagues. This is a special episode because of a recent event by the Department of Education. The Department of Education recently released a proposed regulation that left in place the omission of nursing and several other professions from the list of recognized professional degree programs. Based on this decision, the implications will be possibly limitations to loans for graduate education, funding structures, and long-term pipelines of advanced practice and doctoral prepared nurses. So this has actually caused a lot of issues within social media. A lot of nurses have gotten a whiff of this. And they've seen it through social media. They've seen it now in the news, as it's been in the news quite a bit, and various outlets. So for this reason, we are being joined today by these incredible colleagues and leaders for the for the nursing world. And I want to start with introducing some of our, actually all of our guests, not some of our guests. We are being joined by Dr. Bradley Gadel, Chief Nursing Officer for the American Nurses Enterprise, home to the American Nurses Association, American Nurses Credentialing Center, and the American Nurses Foundation. Dr. Katie Boston-Leary, Senior Vice President of Equity and Engagement at the American Nurses Association, addressing DEIAB and workforce challenges within the profession. And Dr. Aisha K. Brooks, retired Rear Admiral and former Chief Nurse of the U.S. Public Health Services. She leads and is the founder and CEO of Vital Voice Nursing. So welcome, Dr. Brooks and Dr. Boston-Leary. You're both veterans to this, to my show at least. And welcome, Dr. Gadel. So let's start with where we are with this whole process of what's going on with the Department of Education. Brad, we'll start with you if you don't mind. Uh,
Yeah, definitely. We've been working on this for the last couple months and have had some concerns that there would be some amendments to the language in the 1965 rule that listed 10 or so profession in a professional category. The big issues here is certain professions and graduate will be designated into graduate degrees, and then this list gets designated into professional degrees. And so the ones that have always been included is medicine, law, chiropractor, theology, and new to the list is clinical psychology. And there was some special language then that says not limited to. So prior to the Big Beautiful Bill, nurses could potentially fit into that category if they were a bachelor degree that led to licensure that would care for people that was required, the post-bachelor degree and licensure required for practice. In the new language, they take out that little nuance, not limited to, and really just limit it to that list of degrees. And nursing postgraduate or post-bachelor degree programs were not listed into that category. So that is where the big concern is right now that we see transcending across the nursing profession. There's a little bit of getting caught up on the word profession versus professional. It is a category within the Department of Education. But needless to say, we do consider ourselves a professional, and we understand that nursing loans could go over $100,000, especially as nurses, stack degrees, and these are lifetime caps. So a big concern for the nursing profession.
you went on mute, Brad.
Yeah, so I just was
Oh,
setting up the issue at hand, and I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing, and then I'll hand it off to colleagues to join the conversation.
yeah.
So on October 31st, the Nursing Community Coalition, which is a broad coalition of over 60 specialty nursing organizations, I think Minority Nurses Association, industry partners, came together to send the undersecretary a letter. So long before we saw the big internet explosion, all the TikToks, all the Instagram reels, we were ahead of this with our coalition partners, and sent a letter, specifically saying that the risk of nurses not being designated as a professional and what this could happen to access to healthcare, especially if nurses chose not to continue their education and pursue especially advanced practice degrees, or seek a degree in academics as educators, because we know that we have a significant pipeline shortage in nurse faculty, preceptors, and we have a training capacity issue that's really an issue with faculty. So those are the big concerns that we brought forward to the undersecretary. We followed that letter up with a statement from the American Nurses Association on November, I think 15th, about 15 days ago. One of the first letters to really get out, and I think that really helped bring some attention. And then, of course, you can see what's come up over the last 72 hours or so, a lot of attention to the issue.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think from what you've mentioned, uh, just just to clarify, we were never on the list, but that really that clause at the end of that where it wasn't just exclusive to the list that was in the verbiage, but it was also open to other things. By removal of that last like three or four words in it, it excluded nursing really from being able to take out additional roles. Now, I have a quick question before we move on. Now, nursing is a little bit mixed on because you mentioned social media, and that's kind of why we're having this discussion right now, is when we look at the information that's out there, we're also seeing a lot of mix messaging from even in the nursing, even from the different organizations. Some of them are addressing this as an NP issue. Some of them are addressing this as a primarily like a faculty issue. Some of them, and that's one of the reasons I want to make sure that I have you guys on is the messaging that's coming out from various organizations is not quite on point, and uh, um, uh, uh, it feels almost siloed, like nobody's talking to each other. And I'm happy to like you meant as you mentioned that you when you start putting out the letter to the undersecretary that you had a coalition of individuals, but why the different messaging? Why are some organizations putting out messages and other ones are kind of sitting on the sidelines? And I don't know if Katie, you want to take that. I'm sure you guys have been working.
Sure, sure. I'm happy to. Well, I think it's the case with any situation where you have some organizations that will lean in hard, and there's some that would decide to sit it out, and some that will also address it from their vantage point, and some that does the all. I'd like to emphasize that the American Nurses Association or the enterprise represents all nurses, no matter
Yeah.
where they are, no matter where they work, no matter what their beliefs are. We represent all nurses. So that's why our messaging attempts to be more inclusive. We're a profession. It's fortunate and unfortunate that we have so many nursing organizations, right? That I read the last time we have over 130 and counting. So when you put all that together and you have all these folks, it's hard to put your arms around who's focused on what, who's doing what, because it's not just the specialty organizations, but even from shared interests and things like that, all the other things, ethnic background, all those things are reasons why you have these different groups. So it's hard to get a handle on who's saying what, but what we do, which is what we did most recently with the latest thing that came out of the Department of Education with the fact sheet that, well,
Mm.
supposed fact sheet. We then engage a number of other or all the associations, national associations, as many as we could, to sign on to that letter to make sure that we're speaking with one word.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you. It would be great for us to speak with one voice and have share each other's interests because from an equity standpoint with the work that I do, I always talk about how all the social movements that were successful because people that were not infected took up the mantle, right, and engaged in the fight. And that's the case here. It would be nice if we could just have one message, but unfortunately, that's not the case. But what we try to do with everything that we put out, every messaging that we do, is to try to be more inclusive. There's always room for improvement, but assume best intentions, right? Even if we do leave someone out, we invite people to call us out for us to be more inclusive. We actually recently, last year, we heard from nurses with disabilities that says, hey, it's hard to sign up to be a member of ANA. We were like, oh my gosh, we didn't even know this was an issue. So we are still working to address that.
yeah,
So that's our goal is for us to not have all these different messages, but in the meantime, we rely on nurses to understand who the source of truth is when it comes to the real advocate for nurses, for all nurses. And we always say we're the premier organization that supports the nurses, all the 5+ million nurses in the US. And we'll
yeah,
always say that.
yeah, and I appreciate that. Dr. Brooks, I want to give you a minute to also, address some of the things that you've seen and the communication that's happened around this whole Department of Education. And it really is a change. I mean, I know some people are saying this is 1965 and there's no change. We're never on the list, but now we're specifically excluded based on the verbiage being changed. So, Dr. Brooks, please.
Yeah, and I think that what you just ended with is the biggest source of confusion for so many people. And I think it becomes, a point that people continue to have conflict over, and clarity is needed because I think at the end of the day, regardless of what you believe about whether we were there and all that good stuff, 1965 is completely different than 2025. And the nursing profession looked different in 1965. So you would expect that particular definition to have taken hold, to have made sense. But if you consider all of the progress that we've made in nursing since 1965, you can understand why that definition not only needs to be updated, but it needs to actually include nursing, right? So that's the one thing. But for me, over the past week, I actually had quite a few people that were saying, we haven't seen you say anything about this issue. As my colleagues have said, we don't all need to jump in with bullhorns. You know what I mean? We all need to have a message, have an understanding, and then get behind a message that is actually true. Now, my concern was that in the nurses that were coming up to me, because I've been traveling for conferences and such over the past couple of weeks, there was confusion, first of all, about as Brad said, profession versus professional, right? Professional degree program. Like those are three different terms that people were conflating. So there was that confusion. And so that's when I first kind of spoke up to people and having them understand we're talking about the Department of Education. That means we're talking about federal loan programs. That's what they do. They don't identify who's a profession. That's not in their lane. And furthermore, as far as I'm concerned, no one can tell us whether or not we're a profession. We already know it, right? So, but the other piece was the what am I going to do about it? And that's what I became concerned about because people were taking a very emotional stance as though someone walked up to them on the street and said, as a nurse, you don't matter. Nowhere in the language did it point out nursing. We recognize that we weren't there because we're nurses, as we should. But nowhere in the language did it say, hey, nurses, we want to change your world. But the reality is, when something like this happens, it is up to those who are impacted to speak out and not only speak out, but speak out about how you're impacted. So that's where I come in, right? That's what I've always done in my work experience is help people understand how to frame their thoughts. I'm not in the business of telling people how to think or what to think. My personal belief is my belief. You can agree or not, and that's okay. However, how you approach the situation is important. And what I realized is that people weren't understanding the process and where we were finding ourselves in this moment. Because just as been said, our professional nursing organizations, they didn't wake up last week and say, oh my goodness, look at what the Department of Education is doing. No, that's exactly why you're supposed to be a member, so that you can understand that organizations such as the American Nurses Association have already been involved in this. But where I saw the confusion is people were sending messages, first of all, to the Department of Education. People were individuals. People were sending messages to other organizations because they felt like, I agree with your message and I need you to know that I agree with your message. That's wonderful, right? Even the organizational statements, those are needed because guess how all these people are starting to talk about it on social media? Because of the statements. That's wonderful. I don't want people to get confused that signing a petition is them sharing their voice. That's sharing numbers, and there's power in numbers. And having multiple names on a petition is powerful to show how many people support this particular issue. The difference in the rulemaking process, if you send a form letter, you risk getting a form letter response. And for all the 100,001 people that sent the same form letter, you will get the same response. Now, if 100,000 people send their individual and specific information, the Department of Education is forced to respond and address it. And that's where I want people to understand the difference of where we are right now, because there's a lot of energy being spent in writing, posts and letters and calls and all these things. But at the end of the day, when the public comment period opens, as I said earlier today in one of my posts, I want people to keep that same energy. Keep that same energy and specificity. But the first thing you have to do is actually understand what we're talking about. And that's what's critical. And that's what I think is important about people understanding what, for example, the American Nurses Association has put out. Get the facts. And then you can determine how you feel about the facts. And as I said, you might agree that we need to revamp federal loan process. You might not agree with how it needs to be done. Well, tell them that.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't even agree that we need to revamp the process. Well, tell them that too. But tell them your perspective based on what they're proposing, because the law says this is how they must do it. No matter how much we kick and scream, it's not going to change the process. But what it can change is the outcome. And so for me, it really is a matter of making sure nurses understand how to engage in this process and which avenues actually lead to which results so that they don't get the two confused.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I
And
agree with that. Maybe I'll
uh,
just jump in and
yeah,
totally
please,
say,
please.
I agree as we continue to get momentum, our messaging is to get ready for open comment, and hopeful that people continue to keep this issue front and center in their mind. Signing the petition alone definitely is not what the last stop. Today we're just under 185,000 signatures, which in the last 3 days, that's really blown up. The intention behind that is not only to get some momentum, but hopefully to get us some meetings that we need to have as well. So as an association, we can have face-to-face conversation with decision makers in this space. But definitely, I agree. We want to keep this momentum. We want your voice to be heard. Form letters are one way to show your activism and your voice. But personalizing those letters, when you go in, if you don't send the letter yourself from your own email address and you use it through some of the rnaction.org or other portals where those letters get sent, customize them, make them your story, make sure people know your voice. And those letters are being sent to your congressional leaders. There will be a time for the public comment to go directly to the Department of Education. Some of the initial letters we sent to the RISE committee, which was the committee that decided to make these adjustments in the language out of the Big Beautiful Bill. And it's important to note, and you'll see this in a press release that will be coming out from us in probably the next 10, 15 minutes, is that there wasn't a nurse. As the largest healthcare sector in the United States, and really one of the largest type of employees in the United States, there wasn't nurse representation. It was mostly higher education. It was lawyers. It was payers. It was other folks, but not people from the largest professions in the country. helping make these decisions. So I
And
think
there
that's
was no
important
healthcare. There's
for.
nobody with any healthcare background in that group.
Yeah, but if I can jump in here too, because if you when you're looking at the rulemaking process in these committees that come together, for this particular purpose, that committee was required to have people involved in the federal loan process, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at how the people on the committee ended up on the committee, not only were there not nurses, but there were a whole lot of other health professions, that are finding themselves on the same side of the situation as we are, that were not included. And that is also, a dicey line, right? Because yes, we were not included. Was it designed for subject matter expertise to that level? Actually, no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if that's something that we are looking, and we as the nursing community are looking to change to make sure that if we're talking about higher education, you've got to make sure you include programmatic people.
Yeah.
And that's a part of legislation. It's not a part of the rulemaking process. And so that's, I'm glad you pointed that out, but I want to make sure that people don't start writing letters to these folks that are on the RISE committee, mad that they were not a nurse, you know?
I think
Because their
that's
name
Yeah,
really.
their name is
go
public.
ahead.
So,
Yes,
so
yes, all their names are public.
and just really quick,
Yeah, and yeah.
sorry, I don't want to interrupt. The RISE committee is the Reimagining and Improving Student Education Committee, just in case anybody's wondering what that stands for. So, my apologies, please.
No, I just want to add a few things too, because Aisha, I stumbled on your page because I know that you had shared something around how to respond to public comment, which I thought was fantastic. And I shared it with a couple of people that were asking what the next step should be. So I appreciate the work that you're doing in terms of with your experience also with you as previously as Rear Admiral, Chief Nurse, that lends to the conversation. But I also want to make sure that there's an understanding that the fact that a lot of these policies from that time are being revisited is not by accident. And there are a number of people that are involved in rulemaking that want to take us back to that time. 1965 was when the civil rights movement was born or actually enacted. That's when women's rights were actually on the table, right, for discussion. Black women being able to vote and women being able to vote was also something that was on the table. So it was a different time, but I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that there are a number of people in charge that don't recognize it's 2025 and they don't like what 2025 looks like and they want to take us back to circa 1960, 61, 62, 63. So I think the energy that we're seeing from nursing, and that's one thing that I've really been grateful for right now with what we're seeing is that wow, when was the last time we had a case or an issue on a table where nurses galvanized like this around it, to a large degree, with so much energy, with so much a passion? I can't recall a time. And I think this is fantastic. And this is one of the gifts of devastation of this thing that we're dealing with. And clearly we touched a nerve because when the communication went out today, it only addressed nursing. And as you said, there are a number of other professions they could have addressed, but nursing was the one that
Yeah.
they decided to write about. So let's, to your using your words, keep that same energy. Let's keep going. We're not done yet. We're in for the long haul. We're not going to empty the arsenal right now
Right.
because we have to be measured and we have to be disciplined to make sure that we get to the finish line and we continue to the drumbeat to say this is not right and we need to make sure these policies change and we need to have the right people at the table.
Yeah. I
Yes, I
agree.
know, absolutely. And I'll say, my first engagement, in the federal government certainly wasn't as chief nurse. And I can remember when the Affordable Care Act came out, and I was on the departmental side of the conversation at that point, right? So I watched the nursing community come together to figure out what the impact for our Title VIII programs would be. And, understanding that process of how legislation and how Title VIII has changed even since then. And each time there's been a change, the nursing community has said, whoa, wait a minute, right? But not only that, at the departmental level, you had an opportunity to connect the dots between what the law was saying and that translation of how it ends up getting written into policy. And again, that truly, if there's anything that anyone wants to go and say, this is what Aisha Brooks is talking about, this is my point of, nurses understanding policy, understanding rulemaking. It doesn't mean we all have to be experts, but at some point you've got to step back and let those that are experts, right? Like our professional organizations and the advocacy work that you all are doing, you got to step back and let the organizations do their job. And I'll do a plug because you'll probably get to it, but let me do it also. Join your professional nursing organization, right? Because when you do that, you can not only influence the conversation that's happening within the association, but you can actually help to influence the messaging that goes out, and then you can be proud of it. And you can say, yes, they are carrying my voice. But, I don't believe that there should be 100 plus different voices for nursing. I don't. I don't. And, I mentioned in one of my posts, I do have a different vantage point because I've tried to corral all of that. It's impossible. So we have to all get behind. And just as, Katie was saying, that's what ANA is here for.
Yeah.
That's the purpose, for us to find a home and find a voice and get behind it. If you don't like something that was said, then communicate. There's a process for that too. So I agree with what you're saying. We do have to move in. We have to call things out. We have to identify where things are incorrect. What I'm pushing for is talk to the right people. Because if you don't talk to the right person that can make that change, it's going to fall on deaf ears and it still won't be changed. And so I'm just wanting people to understand where, even in the federal government, to spend their energy so that you don't feel like, all your efforts have just been futile.
Yeah.
Yeah. And can I just stipulate for the
Yeah.
record, we did not plant for her to promote ANA for this session. We
I'm a
just
proud
came
member.
together, and this is all Aisha. I support
Absolutely.
her message for sure, but this was
I,
not a plan. I just want to make sure
no,
we,
fine.
Brad
And
and I want to make sure everyone understands that.
like a few years ago when I joined, I'm like, if I'm gonna be talking smack about the ANA, I should be a member of the
Right.
ANA so I can so I can say I'm a member and I'm trying to
And
talk
talk smack. That's
and
right.
talk smack, right?
Right.
So I mean that was I mean I mean that's the reason, and I feel and I appreciate the fact that you're responsive to the issues that are coming up because you have the expertise that I don't have, and I appreciate the work that you do. But here's the thing that I really wanted to, and part of my frustration of putting it out, putting some of the messaging out in the world. And I have to admit, I was surprised at the response I got because, like I mentioned, there seemed to be like a vacuum that of information, right? The information just simply wasn't there. And when you tell me you guys have been working on this for several months, what was the mechanism? From my perspective, like as a member, like I would want to know that you guys have this on your radar, that you're working on it, you're addressing it, and how can you pull in your membership, if not all of nursing, right? Because we represent the 5 million or so nurses in the US, but how can you, I guess my ask is going to be, how can we also be part of this process as opposed to I didn't even know this was a thing on the books till it came out like all of a sudden I'm like, hey, let me look into that. And I'm one of those that just doesn't go out there and just like repost stuff. I go in, I'm like, okay, I need to validate this information, see what it says, and then see what's going on. And then I went and looked, and there was like nothing. There was like a big, like nobody that I thought should be talking about this was actually talking about this. So, and I appreciate the fact that you have stuff out now, but from my perspective, how can we, as a nursing workforce, as a nursing profession, do be do more in keeping nursing informed and pulling us in earlier rather than waiting for something like this to drop? Because I'm not in the same meetings as you, right? And I don't want, and everything can't be a priority, and I completely get that. But how can we, and we can't, and we could have never expected for this to be, and I even told Brad when I communicated with him earlier, I said this was the Braveheart moment from the movie Braveheart. This is nursing's Braveheart moment where you pull all the clans together to address an issue, right? So how do we how do we do as a profession? How do we bring everybody together? Because saying everybody should join the ANA is fantastic, but everybody isn't going to ANA. ANA, I think, historically has a lot of still has a lot of work to do in getting trust back, making sure that it's meeting the expectations of not necessarily everybody, but as many possible as many people as possible. So I guess my question or my ask would be, what can we do now? Uh, Given that this is a loan thing, right? This is restrictions on loans and based on and I'll post for everybody's the link to what the Department of Education put out today with a fact sheet for just nurses because nurses have
Yeah.
been has been very outspoken about this issue, and their fact sheet of looking at it from a researcher perspective. I'm like, okay, I see how you're putting out facts that aren't necessarily facts. And I'm sure and when I'm looking at this, it looks like they put all of nursing together and said, "Oh, look, they're not even borrowing that much." But I'm sure they put the ADN program in there, they put the BSN program in there, and
Pre-licensure
that the
only.
pre-license they put all that stuff
Pre-licensure
into
only.
one and say, "Hey, look, nursing's not
That's
even
right.
hitting the 100,000 mark." I'm like, you clearly don't know what graduate level nursing costs
Mhm.
across the US. Because if you just looked at graduate nursing and the people who are going for their nurse practitioners, the people who are going for administrative degrees, the people who are going for their doctoral degrees are definitely spending that and then some, right? So this fact sheet from the Department of Education, I'm just gonna put it out there that it's definitely watered down to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think it's
So
good to look at it with a critical eye. We looked at it today when we were formulating our response, and not entirely sure, where the 95% came from. But if you think about the size of the nursing workforce, 5% is not a small number. If you think
yeah,
about the people that potentially could be impacted, and we think about like I said earlier, how nurses often stack the degrees. You go back and get a master's degree and then a doctorate degree. Well, these are
yep,
lifetime caps. These are have an impact broader than one master's degree. It's
yep,
true that there's a lot of master's degree that you could probably complete under $100,000. That doesn't mean that you won't go over the annual cap. You may. And if you are a student that wants to enroll full time and need room and board and have fees and other things, that will easily add up if you're not able to work concurrently, or if you have to, work less hours to complete your unpaid clinical preceptorships. Or if you're in a primarily a rural area and find that the only,
mhm,
CRNA program for you to go to is out of state and you're paying out of state tuition
yep,
in order for you to follow your dreams. And we know that you can't work in CRNA programs, and those ones are traditionally higher. So the impact is broad. Some people wouldn't be impacted, but there's a large amount that are, and we have to make sure that we're being inclusive. To make sure that people that are going back to school have the opportunity and resources needed. And we know that these type of restrictions have a particular impact to certain populations from going back to school and certain socioeconomic status. And I think that we can't, not acknowledge those things as well, especially as we do struggle with a physician shortage and the advanced practice. Nurses are really helping fill that gap, especially in rural, underserved, maternal health, behavioral health. We are really stepping up to the plate to fill those gaps, and we just don't want to, limit people from following
yeah.
their dreams either. And Kate,
That
maybe
that
you
que
can jump in there, but
Yeah. And if I may add a diversity, equity, and inclusion aspect to this, there was an article published by Health Affairs a couple of years ago that showed that healthcare is a profession that has mostly Black women. However, the higher up you go, the less diverse it is. Policies like this keep that structure and this current state in place. And policies like this also hurts people of color. That's when the predatory loans piece comes in. Some people
yeah,
won't be able to get loans and they get into the space of, I would like to become a nurse, but fill in the blank. So you have all these things that compounds and when you really look at also some of the policies of the current administration that has hurt Black women, like last month alone, 90,000 Black women lost their jobs. Since a lot of the policies came in place with DOGE, 300,000 Black women lost their jobs. So this is all par for the course, right? It does have an impact. I'm not saying, you know, I'm not going to spit out conspiracy theories here, but when you see policies like this, not just nursing, but some of the other professions that are excluded, even though that was from 1965, these are all professions that are female-dominated professions. So we have to really, I'm the person that believes that if it looks and sounds like a duck, it is. And that's where I am with a lot of these policies.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity, I think, hopefully. And I like to give a little slither of grace that maybe there are folks at the table that didn't know what they were doing. And this also indicates to me that we clearly have an image problem. Because when I started looking at some of the chatter at some of the non-healthcare media outlets, postings on social media and some of what the public is saying, they really don't see why we have a problem. And their comments are like, why should it cost 200,000 to become a nurse? And when did it cost it? And we don't need them to be up there doing that. We need them at the bedside. Like that's where we need them. That's where we're hurting. So we have to address this image issue because there are a lot of people in the public that don't buy this being an issue. And there are some nurses that are starting to post and
Yeah.
agree with some of those comments as well. Oh, you want to take a loan so you don't have to pay for them, da da da. And this is a way to make a lot of institutions of learning reduce their tuition. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. So I think we need to stop hurting ourselves because this is a self-inflicted injury if we continue to do this. As much as I said, a lot of nurses are galvanizing around this, which is a beautiful thing to see. We find with vaccines, right? Because there is a band of nurses that don't believe in vaccines. They're anti-vaccine people. We have a group of people that are also, for whatever reason, clickbait, what have you, they're also saying, yeah, I agree with these policies. This should not be a partisan issue.
Yeah.
It really should not be. This is an issue for us, for what we're charged to do based on our code of ethics and the social covenant that we have with the public. And if we're supposed to provide care, we need all nurses. We need nurses at the bedside. We need nurses in academia. We need APRNs. We stand in the gap. That's what we do. And we know during the pandemic, it was very clear that's who we are and what we do because when everybody else left scared, we were the ones that stayed behind. Same thing happened with the AIDS epidemic. Nurses were there when families were afraid to come and be with their loved ones.
Yeah.
So we have to think about how this is a replay of history, and we have to think about how this is our charge, and we have to keep going and push to make sure that this policy is corrected to what it needs to be to get nursing to be seen for what it is.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And you mentioned something about nurses agreeing with this is a way to get institutions to decrease their tuition. Where I've been on the institution side, and I'm like, no, no, no. When you don't have enough people enroll, they cut the program. They don't say, oh well, we're going to run it anyway because it's the right thing to do.
That's right.
They just don't enroll for that year or for that semester or what it is. It's not a matter of I say institutions of higher learning, they're businesses. If you don't have enough people paying into that class, they're not going. And I do agree, some programs just are ridiculously expensive. That goes
Mhm.
without saying. I mean, I have even some. This has nothing to do with like necessarily this, but even some bachelor's programs, people are coming out with 100,000 plus loans. I'm like, I barely paid anything for mine. So there are definitely inequities built into systems that are charging people who are trying to get into nursing or trying to get into advanced practice nursing exorbitant amounts of dollars. So I think
Sure.
that's a different issue.
That's a different
This
But
issue.
this
but
is
but
this is
but
not
I,
going to
I don't
solve
I
that.
don't I don't know that it's such a different issue though. You know what I mean? And again, I as a nurse, I absolutely understand the impact for nursing. The issue is bigger than nursing. You know what I mean? So I think that we have to be careful because tuition is expensive in many places. Just like you said, Ali, it is expensive.
Yeah.
It is out of reach for many people. That's why people need the loans in the first place. So from my perspective, capping the loan limit isn't going to force, right? It's not going to force universities to
Right.
comply with this limit,
Right.
but it also still doesn't address the root cause of these problems in the first place. Because when you look at, I've yet to look at or see or receive the data that shows the variability and how much it costs. And I'm only talking advanced practice programs, right? From one school to the next, I would imagine that there's huge variability. What there isn't is an understanding of why, right? So when you talk about building your argument for what we're talking about, it has to be in the context of that same argument that's coming back. And if you're not addressing that, then there that still carries. So if that's the message that's coming from the Department of Education, why does it cost this much to be a nurse practitioner, for example? If the argument and what's put forward doesn't clarify that, then everything you've shared is noise because the issue is why does it cost that much? And not in the sense that, you're not worth that much.
Yeah.
But again, with the same grace that we're asking other people to receive our message, we've got to be willing to receive theirs with grace and understanding that there's some truth in what all of us are saying. We
Well,
just
true.
look
And
at
but I
solutions differently. So what I'm saying is that you have to at least acknowledge that tuition rates for many are out of touch. And again, Aisha's perspective is the issue is the choice that they're making and how to address it is not going to get them the results that they had. It doesn't make their whole argument incorrect, but the road that they're traveling is going to take a down the street, round the corner, out of the country and back way trying to solve the problem that was right across the street.
Yeah, and Aisha, my point about it being a different issue is that this policy is not going to fix that issue. It's not. This
Right.
is a separate policy and issue that needs to be managed because, it's not just for us. We have children that are going into college that we go, oh my gosh, you're going to be saddled with debt forever. And there are a lot of younger generation folks. I have a lot of friends that say, my kid has decided not to go to college because he doesn't want to be saddled with debt. So what does that mean for
Mm.
your earning potential and your quality of life and all these other things? So that is a societal issue that we have to deal with, not just in nursing, but in general, because a lot of people are rejecting the notion that this, and there was a time it was automatic, like you're going to finish high school, you're going to go to college, and da, da, da. And there's nothing wrong with vocational schools and everything else, but I do think that we need to make sure that there's no conflation, that if this policy comes into play, then that issue is going to get fixed. And to Ali's point, that's 2 + 2
Yeah.
equals 5.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, we actually all agree with that. That we absolutely all
Yeah.
agree with that. What I'm just saying is that we have to identify what their actual goal is, right? And I'm talking from the law, not from the Department of Education who's trying to translate the law, but from the Department of Education. If this is their goal, the solution also isn't just simply putting nursing back in a definition. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So I think we also have to make sure that we're tying into the larger goal because that is part of the goal for us, but it still doesn't get to recommending a solution. And even if, as nurses, we're recommending a solution for nurses and for nursing education, it's got to be something that's more than simply putting nursing back into that definition of professional degree. That's what I'm saying, that we
Yeah.
can identify the issue and make sure that each of us are also sharing opportunities to address the problems that we see occurring. But
Yeah.
I think it's dangerous to hold them as completely separate and wait for someone else because it won't be the Department of Ed, it'll be another department who will take on that particular issue. And we'd be sitting waiting for that in the meantime. So that's all I'm saying is that we have to see the interconnectedness of it and looking upstream and understanding these root causes to make sure that what we're recommending actually hits the target.
And I'm not in in those forums where, and these numbers may exist, and somebody who might be listening in may can send them to me if you have them. But I'm not sure if there's a consensus of what it costs to put a nurse through these programs because, as it is, our faculty is underpaid. When I was teaching full time, my students were graduating and making more money as new grads than I was as a professor within an organization, right? So, I mean, those are all issues. Like, what does it really cost to keep a nursing professor with clinical experience and X number of years in the profession, in the business? What does it cost for the ratios, student faculty ratios that we have in our clinical settings? What is the cost of everything that goes along with accreditation? All this other things that goes within a nursing program that we don't always take into account where maybe an English department, I don't want any English majors coming after me, but an English department may not have, right? Because they don't have the same requirements and as a nursing program would. So I think that's a piece that might be missing that we need to make sure that there's a better understanding of what it costs because clearly they understand what it costs for a physician to go through their program, right? Because their limits is definitely higher and for because they have X amount of years and X amount of clinical times and that piece is understood. What is it they're not understanding about the nursing programs that they're saying this is the cap and good luck.
Well, and I would say that there's even variability within the professions that are called out specifically. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that a $200,000 cap covers the cost of every medical
Oh,
school
it doesn't.
degree either.
Right.
So there's
It's-
definitely some concerns there as
yeah.
well, and that could inhibit enrollment in medical schools as well, especially when you think about the amount of debt on a larger scale that could come out of that. And I'm glad you brought up the piece about faculty and pay parity because that's another big issue for the ANA and the nursing community is advocating for nurse faculty because of our pipeline issue and our training capacity issue and keeping faculty in the schools so that they can, continue to, provide education for our new generation of nurses and advanced degrees. And unfortunately, those costs trickle to somebody. We try to, find subsidies and other ways to pay for it, and maybe that's not the right word to describe that. But the truth is the costs have to trickle down. And we know that there's variability in training programs costs too, because some are state schools, some might not be. Benefits packages are different. There's overhead, there's research institutions, there's, the makeups of individual organizations could, primarily online, don't have a brick and mortar. Those things all go into account into the variability, I believe, into those programs as well. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's true. There's different business models across. I do want to go back to one of the questions you asked and make sure that we answer it. And I'm actually just going to ask you the question. What is the best way to communicate with you as a member? Because we struggle with this as an association, and I just got back from Kansas City at the Nursing Organization Alliance, an organization where 50 specialty organizations come together and think tank things like this. How do we communicate? How do we communicate as the next gen? We have 5 generations of nurses in the workforce. We have to send an email. We have to be on social media. We have to, do all the different things to make sure we are meeting people where they are. And we're fortunate enough to have a strong strategic communications team that tries to do multimodal communication. Sometimes we hit it and sometimes we miss the mark. And I'm interested to hear from you. What is the best way for us to communicate this and also put the noise aside because we're advertising, we're talking about advocacy, we're talking about our programs, we're talking about 5, different issues. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to, connect it directly with the consumer of information.
Yeah, definitely. Aisha, do you want to go first, sir?
Yeah, I think it starts with understanding why people don't want to listen. And it's beyond why people don't want to be a member. It's why people don't want to listen. I've come across people who just by virtue of the fact that ANA put it out there, they're skeptical just by virtue of the messenger. So I think that that's the first step in understanding what's in the way. No, you're not going to be able to, poll all the nurses, right? However, in looking at those who were members and are no longer members, that's probably the easiest subset to get an understanding. For some, it might be cost, and that's very real, right? But for others, there may have actually been an active choice or something that happened that had them feel one way or another. I think the other thing is, as I mentioned to some colleagues recently, nursing is not a monolith, right? We will never speak with one voice proverbially because we're not the same people. So we're all going to have our different perspectives. However, I think what the ANA has leverage in is understanding that, the code of ethics, though, connects us all, right? So things like that, as opposed to any type of messaging that can be perceived as polarizing without being connected to anything other than the person who shared it, right? Because then I get to say, I actually don't like that guy, Brad. And so whatever he sends
Really?
out, yeah, my eyebrow is raising because ugh, they put Brad there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But any of the issues that the ANA is sharing is bigger than any individual person that works at the ANA. And if it's tied to who we are and who our professional identity is, then we don't get the noise of the personality and all that kind of extra stuff. That's just not necessary. Because I think at the end of the day, especially now, nurses are clamoring for something that says, this is who I am. And this is a perfect time to help people get back to a focus on professional identity and not your personal identity or your employer or the school you graduated from or anything like that. So I think the start is, well, why don't you want to listen to me?
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you for that.
Can I
That
say
was
something really quick to
yeah.
that? I know, Ali, you're going to want to answer that question too, but we are in a time where there's a mistrust. There's a generalized mistrust of institutions because of all the things that are happening right now. And what I think we struggle with is, okay, you believe in some of the work that we put out, like Code of Ethics. Everyone's like, oh, Code of Ethics, that's an ANA product. But when it comes to this other stuff, I don't know that I could trust them. So I'm trying to understand how that parsing is happening. Now, the other thing that I don't know that people understand is that a lot of our outputs are not necessarily all generated by the people that work at ANA, and ANA is not it doesn't have all nurses within its enterprise, right? Right? So we do a great job, and we always call ourselves a great convener. We convene people from around the country, from around the world, to help sharpen our teeth around, what we need to put out, how we put it out, what we have to do, what's important. We have membership assembly in DC every June to set up our priorities. And then things like this happen that blows all that up, right? And we welcome it, right? Because it happened during the pandemic. Before this became a major issue, we were dealing with the expectant mothers in Indiana and Texas that were mistreated. And that's still
Yep.
something that we're managing behind the scenes. So it's interesting that and that's what I'm trying to understand. Well, we don't trust him for this, but when things are going awry, what's ANA doing? So I just need someone to help it make sense
Yeah,
to
Yeah.
me.
I think it's the thread. I think it's if people naturally are not connecting the dots, then we collectively who understand that connection have to communicate it that way. So even in taking this particular situation and understanding how the messaging that's coming out of ANA aligns with things like the Code of Ethics or whatever other information that you feel that people, find easy to fall behind. So again, it's not forcing people to be in conflict with their, inner morality, if you will, right? And I'm trying to be delicate in how I phrase this, but again, we got people in all different walks of life working as nurses. And
Yep.
if I believed in this law, the idea that you're telling me that there's something that I need to support that is in conflict with said law, as a result, I am now in conflict with you. But the conversation that we have to have as nurses is that our profession is bigger than that. Our profession is bigger than those particular beliefs. And here's why. Not because I said it, not because I need you to echo it, but if you agree, just like you said, if you agree and you follow and subscribe to the Code of Ethics, this should be clear, and this is why. And again, people have a choice, and maybe they still might not. But at that point, now you're questioning your practice as an individual nurse who cannot get behind the Code of Ethics, not the statement that the ANA made about the Department of Education. And I think those are different and powerful as a member to understand.
Yeah. And I think it has to do with the timeliness of the message as well, right? Like how responsive is the ANA to events that are happening? And I 100% agree with Aisha with the component of the nursing ethics. I mean, I've read that thing, I'm going to sound a little nerdy, probably like 6 times now, just because I want to better understand the concepts of it, right? And I think that's my default when I think about things that are happening globally. I go back from a nursing perspective, putting politics aside, right? Because I definitely have my own political views. But when I see things that are not being addressed by the ANA that have very dire consequences when you combine them with the nursing ethics. And I say, why is not the ANA speaking on this issue? Because I know ANA has its own political avenues it has to travel down.
Well, give
Um,
me an example.
I, all right, let's talk about what's going on in the Middle East. I
Hmm.
have very particular views, right? And I'll be more direct. What's happening with Palestine and Israel and Lebanon and a number of those places, right? So I have very particular views, like just from a human rights perspective. If we just take the politics out of it, take religion out of it, just from a human rights perspective, like that would be a topic where I would be like, regardless of who's doing what to who, there's a human rights tragedy that is happening right now. Well, some people say it's genocide, it's not genocide, all that stuff apart. The human suffering that's happening in that region right now, or even not even if you take out Middle East stuff that's happening in other places,
Sudan.
Sudan, perfect
Yep.
example, right? That
Mhm.
stuff that's happening. If you take that, why that would be a platform I would love the ANA to be more vocal on because it's human rights. It has nothing to do with anything else. That kind of messaging. There was, and I can't remember it now. There was something that happened a few years ago, and the ANA was like kind of like the public, and like the Association for Public Health and a number of other associations kind of jumped on it, started addressing it, and it was, and I can't remember it now because my brain isn't working, but it was like it took like the ANA another like 3 weeks, 4 weeks until there was an uproar for the ANA to come in and make a statement on it. So like the timeliness, I mean, I think that's where like the trust is. If we default to our code of ethics when we are addressing the various things that are happening within the U.S., outside of the U.S. Let's take the ICE stuff, right? That has public health uh, issues. It has human rights issues, all kinds of stuff that's happened. And I get it that it's a political thing. Not everybody is on board with it. Even I'm sure within even we saw through social media, our own nurses within the US were going on social media and saying, yes, this is what should be happening. And I know there's a conflict, but when you default to our code of ethics, the answer is quite, for me anyway, is quite clear where the ANA and the professions should stand, right?
Mhm.
So I think those are the things that we want to see. We want to see more, I would want to see more bold leadership where the ANA is. I mean, the fact that the ANA took themselves out of the endorsing presidential candidates, right? Let's take that for example. I mean, that particular, I mean, can some candidates, and I'm without naming anybody, some candidates are clearly on the opposite side of the spectrum when we talk about our nursing ethics and what we want to do as a profession for the health of everyone, as opposed to what is being done. So that's the kind of stuff like I would want to see. I'm sure other people say everything is fine and everything's good to go. But
No,
I like
no, we've
even
heard it before.
even
And
even from a DEI perspective, I want to see, like the ANA that has done some really great work with the DEI, but now it kind of feels like it got scooted aside and it's not front and center as it was just like maybe a year ago,
no, well,
right?
I can address that, but
Well,
but I'm gonna give Brad, because I know
Yeah.
I think it's probably important for you to understand how we're, give you some
yeah,
insight to our sausage making,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and give me a little grace for being here for 6 months. And I don't want to misspeak. There are some restrictions based off of a nonprofit status on where you can go and where you can't go.
yeah,
That's not an excuse. I just know that there are some boundaries.
yes,
Um, the area regarding global conflict, and I'm glad you brought that up because ANA may not have put out a specific statement on behalf of ANA, but as a part of the global nursing community in the International Council of Nursing, we this last year in Helsinki, 60-ish countries come together, all the national nursing organizations, and that was a resolution that came out of there. It was denouncing global conflict. There was they did not specifically call out certain countries. Although it did come up for conversation, but the Sudan example that you came, the Sudanese Nurses Association was there and said, there are conflict happening all over the world, and this should be addressed on a broader scale. And so there was a resolution that came out of the International Council on Nursing denouncing global conflict and the impact that it has to healthcare providers in every country that is in these situations. And could we talk about that differently so that people understand, where we're at on a global stage and how we're coming together as a broader nursing community? I think that there are some opportunities there, but that's one example, and there are others where we probably had an opportunity to step up in different ways. There's also a governance perspective. Somebody that's been involved in organizations, associations. You have boards, you have policy agendas, and then our superseding body is our membership assembly, which sets forth kind of our practice and policy agenda. And there's emergent things that come up throughout the year. And so there are these different kind of checks that you have to go through for what you're going to comment on, what's on the policy agenda, what's the work that goes forward, and what constitutes kind of an emergent issue or emergent proposal. And so that's some of the sausage that Katie was talking about. But it's important for us to also hear back from the members on the big issues. And I can get in some doomsday scrolls on social media and see what folks are saying and pick up a little bit. But I also want to hear directly from the nurses of the country of what we can be doing to represent as well. And Katie, if you want to jump in there, I think.
Yeah. I think I mentioned earlier our membership assembly, right? And that's the highest governing body at ANA. And in addition to what Brad mentioned in terms of the global piece, because we will definitely align with ICN and we have relationships there with other NNAs and in terms of looking at global impact, because we recognize that what happens beyond our shores and does impact us, right? And impacts our members. But recognizing that, we also have accountability to our members. And we want to believe that because we have the code of ethics and the fact that a number of nurses subscribe to it or ascribe to it, it doesn't necessarily mean that a lot of things that seem very easy, black and white, that, oh, well, since we have this, it means that we should not support that. It's not that clean. So when we have membership assembly, and we have discussions around all the things, and we have a process where people submit their thoughts about what we should focus on, what we should discuss, what we should have what should be our priorities for the upcoming year. We get a mixture of a number of different things. And I'd love for both of you to attend membership assembly so you can see how that works. And it's a very powerful gathering of nurses from around the country that come together and we have open debate about different things, right? And I told you, Ali, that Veterans Health popped up because of that same process about a year or so ago.
Right.
So when we have this highest governing body that's after all the debates, and those are pretty lively debates, trust me, there are no restrictions. There's some profanity at times, not a lot, but we always get it from one state. I'm not going to say which one. That's what ends up being, okay, this is what we're going to focus on. This is going to be our charge. And the thing is, even though some things may seem clear because of our code of ethics that we should focus on, it's interesting how when it does get to a point of action, and some of the things that makes it so where nurses say, well, maybe it should not be something, and there's some things that we're even having a discussion right now, and it's not a secret. We're talking about LPNs right now. And that is one of the more divisive conversations we can have in membership assembly and in nursing, period. Ratios is another one. So some things that seem so clear and in terms of decision making for what we should take up, not necessarily so when you get in that room. So
Yeah.
that's what determines what we take up and what we focus on. And that's why I want to make sure there's an understanding. It's hardly a process where it's a bunch of ANA heads like me and Brad and a couple folks that say, let's focus on this today. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't work like that. We have a number of folks that we're accountable that sets up what we focus on and what we talk about and what we don't. But believe us, when it comes to some of the things that concerns us, for the most part, I think we share a lot of the same ideals. But what we do, because this is where I have to separate my personal self and my professional self. Personally, I'll take on everything. Anything that comes our way, we'll take it all on. But realistically, it's not possible. And we can't be all things to everybody, which is why our strength is in our partnerships. With the last thing that I mentioned with the Black expected mothers situations that we saw, which was so disturbing, we connected with A1. We connected with our state chapter leaders, right? In those states where it happened. It's okay, what are you doing? How can we help you? A1, what's going on? Can we help you? Oh, we're going to write a statement. Great. When you're done, we're going to amplify it for you. A lot of people say, why didn't ANA write a statement? Well,
Mm.
there's such a thing as overstepping, right?
Yeah.
So we have to let some of the leaders on the ground and the folks that are in that specialty do the work. So that is what we want to make sure everyone understands. We don't have a room where we just go in the room and say, we're going to take this up today. There are a number of things in place infrastructurally that sets up what we take up and what we don't. And even
Yeah.
if we don't take it up today, doesn't mean we won't take it up ever. There could be a time that we will, but because of those processes, maybe it seems like we're not as responsive as we should be, but our goal is to be. But we also want to make sure we don't get ahead of ourselves and lean too forward over our skis when we speak too soon. And then other things are developing, but in your mind, you're cemented that this is a done deal. But there's so many things in the background that's happening that you probably don't see. So sometimes that's why we have the delay.
Yeah. And I think it's okay for you not to be the lead person because because there's other people that are, as you mentioned, like A1, for example. But it would have been great for me to know, and maybe I missed the memo, for me to know that ANA is actively like working with A1 and A1's going to put that out. I would love to see that because then
Sure.
I
So
would know.
Sure, well, let's
Because
talk about that. Let's
yeah,
talk about that. Let's talk about how that works. Because if we reach out to A1 and A1 said that we're working on a statement, and we put out that we're working with A1 and they're going to come out, then we're putting A1 on the target rack, the target on their back. So where's your statement going to come out? So
yeah.
I think
But not
there's
even
some
calling them out,
sensitivity.
but not even
Yeah,
calling, but just the fact that I
but that's
know
the world that we're in, right?
like
There's some
we're addressing it,
sensitivity.
right? Just like, hey, look,
Well,
we understand this is happening and we're actively looking into it or whatever it, somehow the messaging of that way, I don't think like ANA is not even, it's not on their radar.
and I think that's the important piece, right? Because this whole part of the conversation started from the member perspective. And so as I'm listening, it's like, look to ANA because we speak for all nurses. But on certain things, go listen to A1, right? So again, we have to figure out what is the message to the nurses because if you tell nurses, and especially those who might not even be members, because believe me, even those who are not members, of course, visit the website. They know, many follow what you're doing, even if they're not members. If they hear of an issue and the first thing they're going to do is go check out what ANA is talking about, if ANA is not talking about it or hasn't released a joint statement or doesn't have a link, and I'm not saying you didn't do any of these things, I'm not familiar with them, but maybe you did. But if there isn't anything on ANA's, because that's where I've been told, that's the voice for us. If there isn't anything on ANA's site or ANA's website, ANA's LinkedIn to send me to where the action is happening in talking about nurses, then yes, I'll walk away just like Ali said. Well, ANA must not be doing anything. So I think it's kind of thinking from that perspective and, of those particular nurses. And then just another thing on the assembly, those aren't free. So we're still talking about conversations where there is a level of equity, even in many of the decision-making conversations. And having sat at a lot of these tables that cost a pretty penny to get there, I recognize when I look around, we're talking about supporting and providing, for people who can't get here, but they're never going to get there. You know what I
Sure.
mean? And
Yeah.
so there's also that dilemma of no, it can't be free, right? It costs money to have it, period. However, at the same time, how do we bring those voices into that conversation so it does not become basically the same thing that this whole conversation is about? Someone who's got a whole lot of resources deciding how I should use the little bit that I have. So I think that we have to understand what that looks like internally in the same way that we understand it when it's external.
because
Yeah,
it is
and
some of the same
I just want to
voices.
also share that for Membership Assembly, we do also provide scholarships for people to attend. And there are a number of people that we've sponsored to attend, and states also mostly bring delegates to attend where they cover their expenses.
How many would you say that those are though? Because again, in a profession the size of ours, the usual support
True,
that most
true.
professions can get
But
away
that's the
with,
thing, right?
still
Because
not the voice.
we can split hairs all day to say, well, it's 10 per state. Well, 10's not enough. Well, what isn't, I think the key thing to, we talked about grace earlier, right? We're asking for grace as well. And I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that, we're in an environment where we're being whipsawed constantly with a number of crises. Like we're in an era of polycrisis, right? There used to be a time when one will end before another one starts. Now they're
Yeah,
all just sitting on top of each other. So when we're dealing with all these multiple issues at a time, and within one crisis, there are probably 10 things that we're doing. Think about how laborious it would be for us to keep you updated on, well, we're doing this now, we're doing this now, doing this now. Now, mind you, always opportunity for improvement, right? And the purpose of this discussion, which Brad and I are acknowledging, is that, okay, let's think about how we can tweak things. But I just want to make sure there's some acknowledgement that sometimes there's sensitivity around what we release at what time, right? There's also a need for resources to keep that up, all those things. And the same thing, right? When we talk about membership, and membership is, and I think Ali, that's in one of your posts, like, membership is not that great. And that's the case for a lot of associations right now
yeah,
because of the state that we're in with mistrust, right?
yeah,
But at the same time, when we're putting it out there, like, well, you're not meeting it, and we don't have membership, and we do have other streams of revenue for sure, but these are the things that pay for resources to do what you're asking us to do. So I love the way we started, Aisha, where you said, hey, become a member of a professional organization. Great, because that's exactly what we want. And what we're about right now is a membership experience, which our CEO is really pushing about how it's not enough to just be a member and say, okay, we're going to give you what you're going to give you. Tell us what it's like. And we're even looking at how many clicks does it take to get to information, right? Like, how do we make sure that we're adding value? Because
yeah,
you determine what value is, not us. So all those things are things that are in play. We're working on our strategic plan. Those are all the things that we're taking into account. We're looking at things from the outside in versus the inside out in terms of how we organize our work. We are a work in progress, like every single human being that walks this earth. So we're asking for the same grace, and we'll continue to touch base to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our members and our constituents. That's
yeah.
all.
And I appreciate that. And like I said, I know, there's a lot of work that's being done. I think the feeling from a membership perspective is like, as you mentioned, like what's the added value, right? Like I see value because I know an organization like the American Nurses Enterprise or the American Nurses Association is a key factor in representing me at the federal level, right? At the not at the top of the like the national forum, I want to make sure that there is representation that is speaking for me, and the work that we do as a profession. But I think you hit the nail on the head as to the ANA really needs to look at how it's communicating, what it's communicating. Because right now, for me, like the added value isn't necessarily there, other than my own personal uh, uh, um, what would I say? My own personal belief that I need to be a member of the organization, right? Like I don't
Mhm.
need the CEs, right? I don't need some of the products. I'm not in a magnet facility where the magnet is a thing. So I need to make sure, but I work closely with my state organization and some of the initiatives that they have. So I've engaged that way. So I think the biggest thing for the ANA to really look at is how can we how can how can we be more engaged with the ANA as opposed to feeling
Absolutely.
the ANA is this standalone thing and it's doing its own thing and it's not always communicating with me. For me to come to DC every like even once a year, it's pricey because I'm on the West
So you're on the
Coast,
West
right?
Coast. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's not cheap. DC is not cheap. The
sure,
hotels
sure.
aren't cheap. The flight isn't cheap. None of that stuff is cheap. So, and I appreciate the fact that you have scholarships, but
Right.
again, for
But
for
can I add one more thing too?
yeah.
We're as porous as an organization as you can find. because a lot of the work that we do in between those meetings requires us to engage with members,
Yeah.
set up meetings, committee meetings, and all that, which an example is even on the heels of the staffing crisis, which was extreme with the pandemic, set up a think tank, set up a task
Yeah.
force, gather people from around the country to help with coming up with recommendations. That turned into what we're seeing from the Joint Commission years later,
Yeah.
right? And even that, with all the work that we did, we put the work out as we were doing it. We made sure we put it on our members of the committee to say, push it out, make sure everyone knows. All that. We would still go into conferences, people like, I don't know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? Years later, all that work that was done in 22 and 23 is going to manifest in 2026. So this is like Heinz ketchup to a certain degree
Yeah.
too, right? In terms of this type of work, where you're going to do it now, but you're going to see the impact much, much later. But it's going to feel in the middle like we're not doing anything. But we'll continue to figure out how we'll
Yeah.
continue to engage our members in a different way. And I'll stop talking because I think Brad came off of mute and I think he wants to add something.
Oh, I appreciate the feedback because like I said before, I think us, like other associations, struggle with how to reach every member where they're at. And our government affairs team, we're fortunate enough to have a sizable team that does both, state work, federal work, regulatory work, and they're hitting it every day hard, and there are a number of issues. There are issues that we've been talking about that it seems like don't get as much attention. This specific issue has gotten a ton of attention. 2.8 billion reach in media in the last 7 days. It's wild, when you really think about this particular issue. But it wasn't that long ago that we were saying that the federal government was going to cut all of Title VIII funding for nurses, and that there was not going to be faculty loan repayment, or that we were thinking about rural health reimbursement. And although there was traction, it wasn't traction like this. Workplace violence has been an issue and rising every single day, and maybe people are getting numb to the fight, but never got this much attention, although we're up there doing it every single day. The Lorna Breen, reauthorization to protect, the mental health of healthcare providers and nurses, every single day trying to do something. And we do push that information forward, but not every issue resonates with every person. It's important to them for the reason it's important to them, but we're doing all of these things concurrently. And that team is working incredibly hard, and frankly, probably under-resourced for the amount of things that the nursing community would want us to work on. And I think that Katie made a comment about you can't be everything to everyone, but you try to find the biggest issues that seem to resonate with the most amount of people to be able to address with the resources that we have. Membership goes a long way in helping, support that work. The membership dues also don't come straight from your credit card, just to federal ANA. That's split between the states and the national ANA too. So resources, can only go as far as it can. But the team does work incredibly hard, and I'll look forward to different opportunities to be able to share that information forward. Our in Action is a really good opportunity to follow their work. They do have a newsletter that they put out. I don't know if it's weekly or every other week, about all the work that they're doing on the Hill and the state offices. And if you're not subscribed, we'll make sure that you are, so that you can get those updates. And I know that email doesn't work for everybody, especially if you've unsubscribed to it. You may never get it again. And so we do have our social channels. ANA, ANCC, R in Action are probably the three busiest ones. Also Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation. So click and subscribe to those. Those are ways that we try to communicate as much as possible. But like I said, look forward to getting feedback on how we can do that better.
Yeah. And you can also
Yeah.
follow me and Brad. We post a lot, so we can take some of because I know those are a lot of channels, but we can take some of those things that we think were really big issues and we post about it. But can I just address what you said about DEI, Ali? Because I will not sleep if I don't do this. Um, Yes, we had the racial reckoning statement that was issued in 2021. We have the commission that was established also, side by side with that work. We had set up a racial reckoning think tank that set up our recommendations for what we need to do to not only atone, but to also make sure that we're more inclusive. We're working through that list. But in the meantime, we have commission quarterly meetings. We just met about a week ago. And when we met, we talked about the what happened in Texas. And the
Yeah,
Texas Nurse Association lead was there. And everyone gave feedback on what she should consider with her statement, right?
yeah,
That's what we want. That didn't require membership assembly. We had people that were there from multiple organizations, not just members, but people from minority ethnic associations that weighed in and said, consider this, code of ethics, all that.
yeah,
So we have that. In addition, we have an equity fund that we're about to establish a committee that's going to drive how we'll spend and fund projects to address DEI. Hope to start that before the end of this year. And we have our Opportunity and Impact Summit that we're going to have in February. Aisha was at our Equity Summit in February of this year. We're going to have a repeat this coming February, and we had that right on the heels of the executive order that said that we should not be doing DEI, and we had it in DC, a few steps from the White House. We're going to have another summit in February. Now, we called it the Opportunity and Impact Summit. We could lean in and say we're going to call this the Equity Summit, but what we found last year was that we had a number of nurses that would have loved to be there, whose employer would not cover it or disallow them from coming. So our
yeah,
belief is that we're going to have this meeting. Once you're there, we're going to tell you what we're going to tell you. But we're going to not just talk about the issues. We're going to talk about how we move forward. We're going to talk about what can do to navigate this space, make it better, address these structural inequities that exist for nurses of different backgrounds and ilks and things like that for us to be able to be better together. So that's the focus of this summit. I would love to see you there. It's February 12th through the 14th. But I also challenge you to tell me what nursing organization is doing all the heavy lifting that we're doing on the national level. And we do this work in coordination and collaboration with our minority ethnic associations. There's so much more I can tell you about what we're doing,
yeah,
but at least this gives you a taste of the fact that we have not set this aside. We're
yeah,
leaning in completely in this space because that is my role. And I take it very, very seriously.
yeah. And I wish and I didn't want to make it sound like you're not doing the communication. Again, I think it goes back to that communication piece, right?
Yeah, we
Uh,
have a
that,
newsletter that I
that,
put out quarterly,
that,
that we push out generally. I also
yeah,
post about the work that we're doing. So, it's kind
yeah,
of like, when I was a chief nursing officer years ago, and even before that, when I was a manager, we would have our team and we'll have staff meetings. And staff will say, I don't know what's going on around here. Then we'll do a communication book. I know everybody remembers that. And then we'll say, well, everyone needs to sign a communication book. And that became another thing. Well, let's put signs
mm,
on the back of bathroom stalls because people read things there. Like it's always something that we chase, right?
yeah.
It's something we chase, like it's never enough. And we just continue to listen to figure out how we can be better.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate it. I appreciate that this is a forum that hopefully a few people will tune into and listen to all the work that's being done. I think the moral of this story, I think more people need to join the American Nurse Association or their professional organization. I think ANA needs to be a default for everybody. If I had it my way, uh, I would uh, uh, I would say, you know what, it needs to be part of your licensure that you're a member of the ANA. It's just automatic because I think that gives ANA the kind of like the membership. And when you go to I'm sure when you go to lobby for various nursing things, membership matters, right? And I think that's why some lobby groups have a larger pull than, it's for me, it's sad that the with 5 million nurses that we don't have a huge constituent of members within the ANA. I have like five memberships, and I always have to once in a while one drops off because I have bills to pay, right? So it
Yeah.
becomes some years somebody's not going to get my membership dues. So ANA hasn't been one of those yet. So we'll see. But I'll definitely put the post, and I appreciate everybody being here. And I know we've spent a good amount of time on this. And I think when it comes to, I will just so we're circling back to the main reason we met around the Department of Education. I will put the links to the petition that you guys are putting out, and to the American Nurse Association, and anything else that you may feel would help. I'm more than happy to lend my platform to that, because I think it's important that we keep nursing engaged with the right information. Because right now there's so much misinformation out there, and there's people that have their own views as to what the Department of Education is doing. But I think overall, I think the negative impacts of the Department of Education doing this is greater than I think most people realize.
I
So.
Amen,
appreciate you
brother.
having us. It's good dialogue, and your voice matters, and it's important, and we appreciate you amplifying the message. So thank you very, very much. And when public comment comes open, make sure that you
Yes.
follow our channels, and I'm sure every other channel out there will help disseminate that information as well.
Yes, actually, great thing. I'm going to emphasize that really quick. The component for public comment is not coming out till, like, I think early 2026, something like that. But yeah, so please stay tuned, because this is not a done deal. So please make sure that you are active and you're participating. So with that said, I want to thank you all for your time. I greatly appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you all in person. And Brad, you're still supposed to come on the show as just for the show.
All right.
All
Sounds
right, I
good.
appreciate it. All right.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Ave. Thanks
everyone.
for having me.
Have a great
Thank
one.
you. Happy
Yeah.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me on the RN Mentor Podcast, a production of RN Mentor Consulting. Please don't forget to follow and check out rnmentor.org for additional content, speakers, podcast notes, and more. Until next time, fair winds and following seas.